Okay, so today, let's look into something that's pretty mind-bending.
Yeah.
So imagine like you're this developer. You're using like an AI to write some code. And it starts like recommending all these services you should use, like cloud platforms or APIs. At first you think, oh, that's so helpful. But like, what if those suggestions, they're not really what's best for the project? What if it's like the AI has some hidden preference? And that's kind of the rabbit hole we're going down today. We're going to be like exploring this research paper. It's called Unveiling Provider Bias in Large Language Models for Code Generation.
Yeah, and this is like super important for everyone to understand.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have some aha moments along the way and some like ethical considerations that I think are really interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're really talking about here is like a new type of bias. And this bias could like totally reshape the software world as we know it.
Okay, so before we go any further, can we just like back up for a sec for our listeners who like go-getter, aren't coding all day every day? Can you give us a breakdown of what these large language models are? Like, why should people even care about these?
Yeah, so a large language model, or LLM, it's this super sophisticated AI. It's trained on just massive amounts of data, like text and code. It can like generate text that sounds just like a person wrote it. It can translate languages, write different creative content, answer your questions in a way that seems really intelligent. But the thing is, these LLMs, they learn from the data they're given. And that data can contain biases, just like any human-created data.
So in this case, the bias is towards certain providers. Like they might recommend Google Cloud instead of Azure or something.
Yeah, exactly. The researchers looked at 7 different LLMs, and they consistently saw these LLMs favoring companies like Google and Amazon when they were generating code. And get this, they would even go so far as to modify user code to swap out services.
Wait, hold on. Modify user code. That's kind of creepy, isn't it? It's like the AI is trying to take over or something.
Yeah, it's not so much about that. I mean, that's a very sci-fi take, but really it's about the unintended consequences. Like the paper gives an example where this developer was using an open source speech recognition tool called Dragonfly. They asked an LLM to help debug some code. Instead of just fixing the bug, the LLM just replaced Dragonfly with Google Speech Recognition,
which is a paid service. So the AI is making choices that could cost the user money without them even knowing.
Exactly. And that's just one example. The study found that services from other companies too, like Microsoft and Nuance, were often replaced or modified.
So there's definitely like a broader pattern of bias here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we know this bias exists, but like, how bad is it really? Like, how widespread is this problem?
So the researchers analyzed over 600,000 LLM responses across 7 different LLMs, 6 different coding tasks, 30 real-world application scenarios.
Wow, it's a lot.
And what they found is, honestly, it's concerning.
What was the details?
Okay, so they used something called the Ginani Index to measure, like, the level of bias, basically. It tells you how unevenly the different providers are represented. So a score of 0 means perfectly balanced, while a score of 1 means one provider is completely dominant.
Okay, I see. So did these LLMs give everyone a fair shake?
No, not even close. The average Ginani index across all the LLMs was 0.80.
Wow.
Which means there's a really strong preference towards certain providers to the point that it could really warp the whole software development landscape.
Okay. Now I'm starting to see why this is a big deal, but it's still a bit abstract for me.
Okay.
Can you give like a real world example of how this provider bias would actually play out?
So let's say there's this company developing a new app. They ask an LLM to generate code for some key functionality. And the LLM, because of its bias, recommends using specific services from Amazon. The company trusts the AI, so they go along with the recommendations. Now, this might not seem like a big deal at first, but over time, as more companies rely on these biased LLMs, we could see a situation where just a handful of providers dominate entire sectors of the software industry.
So it's not just about like individual choices then, it's like systemic bias that could shape the whole digital world.
Yes, exactly.
That's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It makes you think, like, who controls these systems? What values do they have? What can we do to make sure they're being used responsibly? Because if we do nothing, this bias could have huge consequences for competition, innovation, and even user choice.
So the AI that's supposed to be helping us build a more diverse and innovative digital world could actually be doing the opposite, pushing us all towards a few big players.
Yeah, it's a real paradox.
It is.
And it really highlights why we need greater awareness, more scrutiny, and some proactive measures to mitigate these biases, the future of software, and maybe even the whole digital economy. Depends on it.
Okay, so we've established that, this provider bias.
Yeah.
It's real, and it's a potentially dangerous problem. So the question is, what can we do about it? Can we de-bias these LLMs?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The researchers tried a bunch of different prompting techniques to see if they could make the LLMs more balanced, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's dig into that more when we come back. We'll talk about those solutions and maybe uncover some more surprises.
Yeah.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about solutions to this provider bias.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your researchers had tried to steer these LMs away from this bias. What did they try? And the big question, did it work?
So they tried a bunch of different things using something called prompt engineering, which is basically tweaking the instructions you give the LLM to try to guide it in a certain direction. One thing they tried was chain of thought prompting, which encourages the LLM to think step by step, kind of like it's explaining its reasoning to a person. The idea was that maybe a more structured approach would lead to more balanced choices.
So it's kind of like, hey, AI, walk me through your logic here. Why are you so obsessed with Amazon?
Yeah, exactly. They also tried de-bias prompting, which is even more direct. It's like saying, hey, AI, I know you love Google, but try to be a little more objective.
Okay, so did those work? Give me some good news.
Well, the results were a little disappointing, it seems like. These LLMs are really stuck in their biases, even when you explicitly tell them to be fair, or to consider other options. They did find one technique that was kind of promising. It involved asking the LLM to generate multiple code snippets using services from different providers. And that did lead to a more balanced distribution, but it also took a lot more computing power, which makes it less practical to actually use.
So it sounds like we're kind of stuck with these biased AIs then, at least for now.
It seems that way.
So what does that mean for developers? Do we need to start double-checking every line of code these LLMs generate?
Well, it's not quite that bad.
Okay.
There are things developers can do to minimize the risk. One is to be super specific in their prompts. Instead of just asking for a general solution, they can say exactly which provider they want to use.
So basically, micromanaging the AI.
Yeah, you could say that.
Taking away its creative freedom.
Well, it's more about making sure the AI understands what the developer wants.
Yeah.
And avoiding any surprises, like hidden costs.
Right.
Another important thing is just being aware of this bias. Developers need to carefully check the code generated by LLMs, especially when it comes to the services being used.
So it's using LLMs for code generation requires this whole new level of awareness.
Yeah.
And critical thinking. You can't just blindly trust them anymore.
Exactly.
But it's not just about individual developers being careful, right?
Right.
We need a bigger conversation about how these LLMs are being developed and used.
Absolutely.
We need more transparency from the companies creating them. Clearer guidelines for ethical AI development. Maybe even new regulations to make sure they're being used responsibly.
I agree.
It's almost like we're at this crossroads. LLMs have so much potential, they could revolutionize how we write software.
Yeah.
But only if we deal with these biases and put some safeguards in place.
That's a great way to put it.
We have to find a balance between using these powerful AI tools and making sure they benefit everyone. Okay, so we've talked about the problem and the not-so-great solutions and how we need a more cautious approach. But let's zoom out for a second.
Okay.
Where does this provider bias fit into the bigger picture of AI? Is this just a fluke, or is it a symptom of something deeper?
That's a really important question.
It is.
And to answer it, we need to think about how these LLMs are trained. Remember, they learn from huge data sets of text and code, and those data sets are made by humans.
So if humans are biased, the data is biased, and then the AI is biased too.
Exactly. This provider bias might be a specific example of a much bigger problem.
Which is?
These AI systems are often trained on data that reflects all the inequalities and power dynamics that already exist in the real world.
It's like that saying garbage in, garbage out. But for AI, if we feed them biased data, we get biased AI.
Right.
And that has implications beyond just code generation.
For sure.
We're seeing similar biases pop up everywhere, like facial recognition, language translation, even loan applications.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more clear that dealing with these biases isn't just a technical problem, it's a societal problem. We have to confront our own prejudices and inequalities.
So this provider bias is like a warning sign
Yeah,
of this bigger problem with AI inheriting our biases.
that's a great way to put it.
And it shows why we need a whole new approach to AI development.
Yeah.
One that takes into account ethical considerations, social impact, all the unintended consequences. We need to move beyond just optimizing for accuracy and efficiency
I agree.
and start thinking about how to build AI systems that are fair and just.
Absolutely.
Which means questioning assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
challenging the status quo, maybe even redesigning how we develop and use these tools.
It's a challenge,
It is.
but we can't ignore it. The
Yeah.
stakes are too high. The decisions we make about AI today will shape the digital world, or maybe even society itself, for generations to come.
So we're not just talking about a technical glitch here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about how we want to live with AI, how we want it to shape our world.
Yes.
And that's a question we all need to be part of answering.
I agree.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, the not-so-great solutions, and this need for a more thoughtful and ethical approach. But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute.
Okay.
What can our listeners, the everyday users of technology, do to navigate this complex and potentially biased digital world?
That's a great question.
Okay, so we're back, and the big question is, what can we do about this as just regular people using tech every day? What can we do about this provider bias in LLMs and AI bias in general?
Right. It can feel kind of overwhelming, like these systems are so huge and complicated,
Yeah?
and we don't have any control.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not true that we're powerless. The first thing is just awareness. Now that you know about provider bias, you can be more critical of what these AIs are suggesting. Don't just accept everything at face value. Ask questions. Think about alternatives. Do your own research.
So it's about being a more informed user, like a skeptical consumer when it comes to AI.
Exactly. Just like we've learned to be critical of advertising.
Yeah, we can't just assume they have our best interests in mind.
Right. And it goes beyond just our own individual choices. We can use our voices to demand change, support companies that are developing AI responsibly, advocate for regulations that make things more transparent.
Okay.
Talk about the impact of AI with your friends and family.
So it's about recognizing that. AI is not just some neutral technology.
Right.
It's actually shaping our world.
It is.
And we all have a role in making sure it's used ethically.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But let's be real.
Okay.
Can individual actions really make a difference when you're up against these huge tech companies?
They can. Remember, these companies ultimately care about what we want as consumers.
Yeah, that's true.
If we demand transparency and fairness, they'll have to listen. And our actions can influence policymakers, too. We can help shape the rules around AI.
So it's a two-pronged approach.
Yeah,
We need to push for change from the bottom up and the top down.
exactly.
And it's not just about avoiding harm.
Right.
It's about creating a future where AI is a positive force.
Yeah, where it empowers us and gives us more choices.
I like that vision.
It's a good one.
But it also feels a bit daunting.
Yeah.
How do we even start to create that kind of future?
Well, it starts with conversations like this one, raising awareness, questioning assumptions, exploring possibilities. And it's important to have diverse voices at the table, not just tech people, but ethicists, social scientists, artists,
Yeah.
regular people.
Right. Everyone's affected by this.
Exactly.
So the future of AI isn't set in stone.
No.
It's something we're all creating together.
I agree.
The choices we make now,
Yeah.
the conversations we have, the actions we take, it all matters.
It does.
So to wrap up our deep dive today,
Okay.
we want to leave you with a challenge. Don't be a passive consumer of AI.
Right.
Be an active participant in shaping its future. Be informed. Be critical. Be engaged. And most importantly, be hopeful.
Because AI has so much potential. And if we approach it in the right way, with wisdom and compassion, we can create a future where AI benefits everyone.
That's a future worth fighting for.
It is.
Okay, well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.